The boardroom on the 47th floor of Meridian Dynamics Tower smelled of fresh espresso and fear. Red ink bled across the projection screen like an open wound. CEO Elena Voss reached for the silver pen that would kill the $420 million acquisition of Apex Forge. At that exact second the man who had only been sent up with archived binders spoke, voice low and steady. That environmental liability figure you're all terrified of, it's inflated by a factor of 4. The room exploded in laughter. The lead advisor, hair perfectly gelled, leaned forward and sneered, "Stick to filing paperwork, Hale. Leave strategy to people who earn their degrees." The same polished advisor had no idea the quiet father in the oil-stained jacket was the only living person who had personally designed the certification protocols that made the target company secretly worth triple its listed price. What exactly had Marcus been hiding in those dusty binders for the last 12 years? Marcus Hale kept his face blank while the laughter died. His right hand slid into the pocket of his faded Carhartt jacket and closed around the small, worn metal dog tag. Sophie had pressed it into his palm that morning. "For luck on big days, Dad." The metal was still warm from her fingers. He was 41, widowed, raising a 9-year-old alone in a small brick house on Maple Lane in suburban Edgewood. Every evening he made sure he was home to cook macaroni, check math homework, and read one chapter of whatever fantasy book Sophie had picked. That was the deal he had made with himself after his wife's funeral. No more 90-hour weeks. No more boardrooms that swallowed good men whole. Yet here he was again. 12 years earlier he had been the original Delta-certified aerospace tooling engineer at Apex Forge. He had written the heat shield certification protocols that still protected half the commercial fleet. When he warned the board that corners were being cut on environmental reporting, they had smiled the same smile he was seeing now and shown him the door. So he had disappeared into the night shift, reconciling supplier contracts, staying invisible, staying present for his daughter. The laughter finally stopped. Elena Voss studied him for 3 cold seconds. "You have 20 minutes, Mr. Hale. One claim. Prove it." Marcus walked to the head of the table without a word. He plugged in a battered USB drive older than most of the interns in the room. The main screen flickered. Delivery logs from 2011 appeared, crisp and untouched. "These 3 clients," he said, tapping the screen, "were listed as cancelled. They never left. They simply rebranded under parent company agreements. 180,000 units a month, still shipping. That alone covers the entire environmental line item you're using to justify walking away." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The lead advisor's $9,800 Italian loafers shifted on the marble floor. Elena stared at the numbers, then at Marcus. "Cancel the kill order," she said quietly. "Everyone else, out. Hale stays." By 9:30 that night the boardroom had emptied to just 3 people, Elena, a neutral auditor named Patel, and Marcus. Coffee had gone cold. Ties had come off. They found the first landmine at 11:17. The $38.4 million environmental cleanup cost had been legally capped at $4.2 million by a 2009 indemnity agreement no one in the consultants' team had ever been shown. Marcus pulled the original PDF from the archives. The signature page was still crisp. Elena read it twice, then looked at him with new eyes. At 1:40 they located the tooling certification binders. Page after page of test data proved Apex Forge's proprietary heat shield process would save Meridian 26 months and $67 million in requalification. Each discovery was quiet, procedural, almost surgical. Marcus kept one eye on the clock. Sophie's bus left at 7. He would be there. But at 2:14 a.m. the first real blade appeared. CFO Richard Lang, Brioni suit still knife-sharp despite the hour, had quietly leaked select data to rival firm Sentinel Capital. An emergency board memo landed in Elena's inbox, resurrecting Marcus's old 2014 software rollout failure and painting him as the reason Apex Forge had nearly collapsed once before. Elena's confidence wavered. Her pen hovered. Marcus said nothing. He simply dialed a number from memory. The retired plant manager answered on the second ring, voice gravel from years on the floor. "I kept copies, son. You filed 3 written objections. They were erased from the minutes the same week you were shown the door." The call lasted 90 seconds. When it ended, Elena set the memo aside. Her voice was softer now. "Keep going." They moved the operation at 3:30 to an off-site storage unit that had flooded the year before. Water-stained boxes. The smell of mildew and old paper. At 4:47 a.m. Marcus lifted a collapsed cardboard lid and froze. Inside the missing indemnity folder lay the small metal dog tag. Sophie must have slipped it into his coat pocket again while he was grabbing his keys that morning. The disc caught the beam of his flashlight and threw it back at him, warm, steady, reminding him exactly why he was risking everything. He turned it over once, slipped it back into his pocket, and kept working. The grind had only just begun. Marcus worked the off-site storage like a surgeon in a flooded morgue. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead. The concrete floor stayed damp under his boots. Every time he pulled another water-warped binder free, the mildew smell rose thicker, clinging to the back of his throat. Elena hovered near the folding table they had dragged in from the hallway, sleeves rolled, hair slipping from its usual tight knot. She no longer looked like the polished COO who had once signed his termination papers. She looked exhausted. That was progress. At 6:12 a.m. the second blade came. Richard Lang's executive assistant, a woman whose Italian pumps clicked like a metronome, delivered a fresh packet in a sealed courier envelope. The cover sheet carried Sentinel Capital letterhead and a single typed line, "Historical negligence proven. Recommend immediate dissolution of current restructuring team." Attached were doctored timestamps suggesting Marcus had personally approved the faulty 2014 code release. The signatures looked flawless. Elena read them twice. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. Marcus watched her without speaking. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his faded canvas jacket and pulled out the small metal dog tag. Sophie's handwriting was still visible on the back, scratched with a child's unsteady pen, "Daddy come home safe." The metal had warmed against his chest all night. He set it on the table between them like a quiet witness. "Same trick they used in 14, he said, voice low. "They erase the objections, keep the approvals. Paper trail only tells half the story." Elena stared at the tag, then at him. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer. Instead he walked to the far corner where a battered desktop from 2012 still sat under a plastic sheet. The machine smelled of old solder and dust. Marcus powered it on. The fan screamed like a wounded animal. While it groaned to life he recited a 12-digit access code from memory. The screen flickered. An archived admin portal opened, credentials still valid after a decade because no one had ever thought to scrub the decommissioned server farm in Building C. He navigated 3 folders deep. Pulled up raw logs timestamped March 14, 2014, 2:47 a.m. The original rejection emails were there in plain text, copied to 3 board members including the then CFO, Richard Lang's predecessor. The language was unmistakable, *, this rollout will fail under current parameters. Recommend full regression testing. Objection logged under my signature, M. Kane, *. Elena read the screen in silence. The color returned to her face in slow degrees. By 7:30 they had printed everything. 43 pages. Marcus folded the dog tag back into his pocket. The metal pressed against his ribs again, steady as a heartbeat. They moved the operation twice more to stay ahead of Lang's surveillance. First to a rented conference room above a shuttered machine shop on Industrial Boulevard. Then, when a suspicious black SUV idled too long at the curb, they relocated to the back office of an old union hall that still smelled of stale coffee and liniment. Each transfer cost 90 minutes. Each transfer added another layer of corrected records to the growing stack. Marcus corrected one line at a time. Exact figures. Exact dates. Invoice number 4471. Purchase order 289, C, 287 separate quality hold memos that had been buried in 2014 and never surfaced. At 1:19 p.m. a new crisis broke. Sentinel Capital filed an emergency injunction claiming Apex Forge's restructuring team was operating with materially misleading information. The filing named Elena directly. If granted, it would freeze all voting shares until after the shareholder meeting, effectively killing their window. The courthouse clerk's timestamp read 13:19 exactly. Richard Lang's signature appeared on the final page, bold and arrogant above the Patek line he always wore when he thought victory was close. Elena's hands shook as she read the document aloud in the union hall. The paper crackled between her fingers. Marcus listened from the metal chair by the window, sunlight cutting across the dog tag he now kept on the table in plain sight. Sophie's scratched letters caught the light every time he shifted. He waited until she finished, then spoke 2 words. "Call Judge Harlan." Elena blinked. Harlan retired in 2019. "Call him anyway." She did. The retired federal judge answered on the 4th ring, voice rough with age but still sharp. Marcus took the phone. They spoke for 40 seconds, names, case numbers, one reference to a cedar box that had once held evidence in a different proceeding no one else in the room understood. When Marcus hung up, the injunction was already doomed. Harlan promised an emergency rebuttal filing within the hour, citing precedent from 2008 that Sentinel's lawyers had conveniently forgotten. Elena stared at him as if seeing the janitor for the first time. The reversal was small, private, and enough to keep them breathing. By 4 p.m. the stack of corrected reports measured 2 inches thick. The mildew smell had transferred to their clothes. Marcus's shoulders ached from lifting boxes, but the dog tag stayed warm in his pocket, a small round promise against his sternum. He thought of Sophie waiting at the neighbor's house, probably coloring another picture of airplanes she hoped her father would one day fly again. The thought kept his hands steady. At 6:47 p.m. they received the next threat. Richard Lang had leaked a second memo, this one to the full board, accusing Marcus of forging archival documents. The email chain included a photograph of the 2012 desktop still sitting in the storage unit, its screen frozen on the old admin portal. Someone had been watching after all. Elena slammed her laptop shut. The sound echoed off cinderblock walls. Marcus simply stood, walked to a locker in the corner, and pulled out a battered leather flight jacket that had not seen daylight in 11 years. Inside the left breast pocket rested a single laminated card, his original Delta operator credentials, the ones he had never surrendered. He did not show it. He only let Elena see the frayed patch on the shoulder, a faded call sign stitched in black thread, *Reaper, 01 star. He slipped the jacket on without comment. The weight felt familiar, like slipping back into an old skin. "That's not standard issue for a night shift cleaner," Elena said quietly. Marcus sipped it halfway. The dog tag clinked once against the zipper pull. "No," he answered. "It isn't." They worked through the night again. Fresh boxes. Fresh corrections. Another 12 pages added to the stack by midnight. The core stakes never changed: control of Apex Forge, the truth of 2014, the public stage that waited. At 2:14 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the first blade had appeared, Marcus found a third piece of the buried indemnity folder. This one carried his own signature from 2013, the one that had warned against the exact shortcut Lang had later approved. The paper smelled of mildew and age, but the ink was still dark. He laid it beside the dog tag on the table. Sophie's childish letters faced upward, catching the weak overhead bulb. Elena watched the two objects side by side for a long moment. She reached out, not to the document but to the small metal disc. Her fingertip traced the engraved name. "Tell me one thing," she said, voice barely above the hum of the old radiator. "Who are you, really?" Marcus met her eyes. The grind had carved new lines into both their faces. "Still just a single dad trying to get home safe," he said. He picked up the dog tag, slipped it back into the inner pocket of the flight jacket, and returned to the next box. The rain had turned to sleet by 6:47 a.m. It tapped against the cracked windows of the old machine shop like impatient fingers. Marcus stood at the workbench, sleeves rolled, dog tag swinging free beneath the open collar of his flight jacket. The metal warmed against his skin with every breath. Elena slid another banker's box across the scarred wood. Dust rose in a thin cloud that smelled of forgotten invoices and basement concrete. "Lang just moved the meeting up," she said, voice tight. "It's now scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. 15 hours. His team leaked it to the press an hour ago. They're calling it a streamlined governance reset." Marcus didn't look up. His pen scratched across another correction sheet. Red ink. Precise. The stack beside him had grown to 217 pages. Each one carried a timestamp, a signature, a quiet lie that had been sold as progress. Outside, the Union Hall parking lot filled with cars. Board members arriving early. Consultants in pressed overcoats. A few mid-level engineers who still remembered the jokes they'd made in the cafeteria 3 years earlier. "Night shift guy thinks he can play lawyer." The laughter still echoed in Marcus's ears. He let it fuel the next line of red ink. At 8:12 a.m. the first crisis landed. A courier van pulled up. 2 Sentinel Capital paralegals stepped out carrying a fresh injunction. The paper was still warm from the printer. It demanded immediate access to every box in the building and threatened contempt charges against anyone interfering. The younger paralegal, polished Oxfords, Bluetooth in ear, read the order aloud in the doorway while sleep melted on his shoulders. Elena's face went pale. The union rep who had loaned them the space started to fold. Marcus simply walked forward, dog tag clicking softly with each step. He took the injunction, scanned it once, then handed it back. "Tell Mr. Lang the archive is protected under the 2014 Whistleblower Retention Clause. Page 441 of the original merger agreement." He signed it. The paralegal blinked. "That clause was never." "It was. You'll find my name on the bottom. Look again when you get back to the office." He closed the door. The lock clicked like a round chambered. Elena stared at him as the van drove away. "That bought us 3 hours," she whispered. "Maybe 4. Marcus nodded once. The grind resumed. By 10:35 a.m. the sleet had stopped. Sunlight cut through the high windows and lit the table like a surgical lamp. They found the 4th document. A faded memo from 2012. Marcus's handwriting in the margin, "This alloy shortcut will shear under load. Do not approve." Lang's elegant signature had overridden it 6 months later. The paper carried the faint ghost of a child's crayon scribble in the corner. Sophie had drawn a stick-figure airplane the day he brought the draft home. The dog tag rested beside it again, the engraved letters catching the same light. Elena picked up the tag this time. She turned it slowly between thumb and forefinger. The chain made a soft metallic whisper. "You flew 287 combat sorties," she said. It wasn't a question. "I ran your name through an old DoD database at 4 a.m. call sign Rook. 2 silver stars. One of them for pulling 6 Marines out of a burning Osprey in Kandahar." Marcus kept writing. The pen never paused. "That was another life. Was it?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "Because the man who wrote these warnings is the same man wearing that jacket. And he's about to blow the roof off the company that fired him for lacking vision." Marcus capped the pen. He looked at the growing stack, then at the clock on the wall. 11 hours and 17 minutes until the shareholder meeting. The core stakes had not moved an inch. Control of Apex Forge. The public stage. The truth of 2014. At 1:44 p.m. the second crisis hit harder. Richard Lang himself appeared at the service entrance. No entourage this time. Just the Brioni suit, the Patek catching the pale afternoon light, and an expression that almost looked human. He carried a single manila folder. "Marcus," he said. The name sounded strange in his polished mouth. "We need to talk. Off the record." Elena moved to block the doorway. Marcus waved her aside. The two men stepped into the narrow hallway that smelled of motor oil and old coffee. Lang closed the door behind them. "I've seen the pages you're compiling," Lang began. His voice was lower than the boardroom version. "Some of them. I don't remember signing. Others I do. I was under pressure from Sentinel. They wanted results yesterday. I made calls I shouldn't have." Marcus said nothing. The dog tag felt heavier against his chest. Lang continued. "If this goes public tomorrow, the stock drops 30% by close of business. Jobs evaporate. Including the night shift crew you seem so fond of. Walk away with a settlement. 2 million. Cash. Today. I'll even reinstate your pension." He slid the folder across a dusty shelf. The papers inside carried fresh ink and the faint scent of Lang's expensive cologne. Marcus opened it. "Read the first paragraph." Then he reached into his inner pocket, pulled out the dog tag, and laid it on top of the settlement offer. The metal clinked once against the metal clip of the folder. Sophie's childish letters on the reverse side faced upward again. "This isn't about money," Marcus said. "Never was. It's about what you told my daughter the day you had security escort us both out the front gate. Remember the exact words, Richard?" Lang's jaw tightened. He remembered. "You told her, your daddy's scrap metal. No value here. Take your little box of junk and go." The hallway fell quiet except for the distant hum of the radiator. Lang's polished shoes shifted on the concrete. For the first time the Patek on his wrist looked like just another piece of metal. "I was wrong," he said after a long pause. The admission came out raw. Marcus picked up the dog tag, slipped it back inside the jacket. "Tell that to the shareholders tomorrow. In front of the cameras. Until then, we keep working." He opened the door. Lang stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the sleet that had begun again. The Brioni coat collected tiny silver beads of water like gilt. Back inside, Elena exhaled. "That was either the dumbest thing I've ever seen or the smartest." Marcus returned to the table. The corrected pages now numbered 289. The smell of fresh ink mixed with the older scent of mildew. The grind continued. Day 5 arrived at 3:22 a.m. with a power flicker. The overhead bulbs buzzed, died, then surged back. In that split second of darkness Marcus felt the weight of every mission he'd ever flown. 287 sorties. One dog tag. One daughter waiting at home with her grandmother, clutching the same stuffed rabbit he had promised to bring home safe. When the light steadied, Elena was holding a new folder. Her hands trembled slightly. "Found it," she said. The original indemnity agreement from the 2014 crash. The one that was supposed to protect the families. Lang buried it behind 6 layers of holding companies. But your signature is the one that triggered the recall notice he ignored. She laid the document down. The dog tag went beside it without either of them speaking. The chain pooled like a question mark. Marcus read the faded lines. Smelled the paper, old toner, basement air, regret. His pulse beat steady against the metal disc. 4 hours and 12 minutes until the shareholder meeting doors opened. At 7:50 a.m. the third crisis cracked across the morning like thunder. A news van parked outside. Channel 7. The same reporter who had filmed Marcus carrying his cardboard box out of the plant 3 years earlier stood on the curb, microphone ready. Behind her, several former co-workers gathered, some curious, some already smirking. One of them still wore the same company polo with the Apex Forge logo faded over the heart. Elena saw them first. "They're here to film you leaving in defeat again." Lang tipped them off. "Said you're delusional, that the documents are forgeries." Marcus zipped the flight jacket halfway. The dog tag disappeared beneath olive drab. He picked up the top 30 pages of corrected evidence, slipped them into a plain accordion file, and walked outside. The cold air smelled of wet asphalt and diesel. The reporter thrust the microphone forward. "Mr. Hale, care to comment on allegations that you're a disgruntled ex-employee manufacturing a scandal less than 2 hours before the biggest shareholder vote in Apex history?" Marcus looked straight into the lens. Behind the reporter, the smirking faces waited for another punchline. He held up the accordion file. "These aren't allegations," he said. His voice carried the same calm he once used on the radio at 10,000 feet. "They're engineering certificates. Signed. Dated. Ignored. 17 families never received the indemnity they were promised after the 2014 crane collapse. I know. I wrote the first report." He pulled the dog tag out into the open air. The engraved name flashed under the camera lights. One of the former co-workers in the back stepped forward. The smirk had vanished. It was the same man who had helped security carry Marcus's box to the curb that day. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Rook? That you under all that night shift dust?" The word traveled through the small crowd like voltage. A few phones came out. "Recording." The reporter's eyes widened. Marcus didn't answer. He simply turned, walked back inside, and placed the dog tag on the table next to the next uncorrected folder. The grind had just become very public. Elena locked the door behind him. Her hands were shaking worse now, but her face held something new, steel. 18 corrected pages in the last 90 minutes, she said. "We might actually make the deadline." Marcus checked his watch. 1 hour and 43 minutes until the meeting. The stack had reached 364 pages. The radiator hummed louder, as if the old building itself had picked a side. Outside, the news van stayed parked. More cars arrived. Word was spreading. The core stakes remained exactly the same: control of Apex Forge, the truth of 2014, the stage that waited 63 minutes away. But now the audience was gathering early. And somewhere in the growing pile of paper and memory, the final document still waited. The one with both their signatures on it. The one that would force Richard Lang to stand up in front of every person who had laughed and say the words out loud. The dog tag lay on the table, catching the weak light, patient as rust, ready for its last flight. The clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow with the same rag he used on engine blocks back when the night shift still trusted him. The dog tag rested beside the growing tower of folders, its chain coiled like a question mark no one had answered yet. Elena slid another corrected page across the scarred oak desk. Ink still wet. Her handwriting tight, precise, the way a mother signs permission slips she can't afford to get wrong. Marcus didn't look up. He kept reading line 412, the one that proved the replacement crane cable had never been stress-tested. The radiator ticked in the silence between them, a heartbeat the building refused to surrender. Outside, tires crunched gravel. Another car. Headlights swept the frosted windows like search beams. Elena's phone buzzed. She read the screen and her shoulders tightened. Richard just texted the board. He's moving the final review up. Wants it at 5 instead of 6. Says he's heard rumors and doesn't want disruptions. Marcus closed the folder. The dog tag clicked once against the wood when he stood. 58 minutes now, he said. They worked faster. At 3:41 a.m. the first new crisis arrived in the form of a single missing signature. Page 289. The 2014 indemnity waiver. Without it the entire indemnity section collapsed. Marcus knew the page existed. He had watched Richard sign it in the old conference room that smelled of fresh varnish and fear. But the original had vanished from the corporate archive 2 weeks after the crane fell. Elena's hands trembled again. We're dead without that page. The board will throw the whole stack out. Richard wins before the sun even comes up. Marcus stared at the empty line where the signature should have been. The radiator groaned like it remembered the same day. He reached into the bottom drawer of the old gray desk he had once been ordered to empty. His fingers found the small steel lockbox no one had thought to check when security walked him out. He set it between them. The dog tag seemed to lean toward it, metal on metal. From inside he pulled a single carbon copy. Yellowed. Brittle at the edges. The signature on it was unmistakable, Richard Lang, bold and arrogant even in 2014 ink. Elena exhaled like she had been underwater for years. Where did you? Kept one, Marcus said. Always did. Habit from 10,000 feet. Never trust the tower with the only copy. He slid the carbon into place. Page 289 suddenly became ironclad. The stack now stood at 381 pages. The grind continued. But the leak kept spreading. By 4:02 a.m. the parking lot held 9 cars. Former welders. Retired inspectors. 2 of the widows from the 2014 collapse stood near the news van sharing a thermos of coffee that smelled of chicory and grief. Their coats were thin against the pre-dawn cold. One of them clutched a faded photograph of her husband wearing the exact same dog tag now resting on the correction table. Marcus caught the scent of that coffee when he cracked the window for fresh air. It anchored him. Grounded the numbers. He kept correcting. At 4:19 a.m. the second crisis landed. Richard's lawyer, a man in a Brioni suit that still carried the dry-cleaning smell of downtown prestige, appeared at the service door. His Italian shoes clicked on concrete. Patek Philippe flashed under the security lamp. He carried a fresh injunction. Mr. Hale, the lawyer said through the chain lock Elena had refused to remove, these documents are the property of Apex Forge. You are trespassing on intellectual property. Hand them over and we won't pursue charges for the theft you clearly committed years ago. Marcus kept writing. His pen never paused. Tell Richard the meeting is still at 5. Tell him I have invoice number 4471. Tell him the carbon is real. The lawyer's smirk flickered the same way the first co-workers had. He recognized the invoice number. Everyone who had worked the 2014 audit remembered it. The one that had been declared lost in processing. The lawyer left without the folders. Elena locked the door again. Her voice was steel now, not just on her face. 41 minutes. They pushed harder. Marcus's hidden past dripped out in pieces, never a flood. A retired flight engineer in the parking lot recognized the calm tone Marcus had used on the reporter. That was Captain Rook on the radio during the '09 icing emergency, the man told a growing cluster of phones. 287 combat sorties before he ever touched a wrench. Saved a whole squadron by dead reckoning them home on one engine. And they made him fix forklifts. The word Rook moved through the crowd again, louder this time. Inside, the dog tag caught the fluorescent light each time Marcus reached for a new folder. It had traveled with him from the cockpit to the crane yard to the night shift. Now it waited for its final mission. At 4:37 a.m. the radiator finally died. The sudden silence felt louder than any shout. Cold air poured through the old vents. Elena's breath misted. The ink on the latest page began to smear from the temperature drop. 23 pages still needed correction and the printer in the corner refused to warm up without heat. Marcus looked at the dog tag. Then at Elena. "Take the carbon copies to the truck," he said. "Warm the cab. I'll finish by hand." She hesitated only a second. The mother in her recognized the tone of a man who had once flown broken birds home on sheer will. She gathered the critical pages and left. Alone now, Marcus wrote by the light of his phone. His fingers cramped. The paper felt like ice. Each corrected line became a small reversal against the cold, against the clock, against the polished man in the Brioni suit who still believed the stage belonged to him. The widows outside began to hum an old work song the forge used to play at shift change. The sound carried through the walls, low and steady, like rivets being driven home. Marcus corrected page 404. Then 405. His watch read 4:51 a.m. 19 minutes until the meeting that would decide who held Apex Forge. The dog tag lay beside the final uncorrected folder. The one with both signatures. The one that would force Richard Lang to stand in front of every witness now gathering in the parking lot and admit the crane had never been safe. Admit the indemnity had been buried. Admit the man he had ordered carried to the curb like scrap had been keeping the entire company alive in secret for 9 years. Marcus lifted the folder. The paper smelled of dust and old varnish, exactly like the conference room in 2014. Outside, car doors kept opening. More phones. More whispers of the name Rook. The core stakes had not changed. Control of the forge. The truth of the collapse. The public stage waiting 9 minutes away. But the audience was no longer small. And the final document still waited inside the last folder, heavy as rust, patient as a dog tag on a night flight, ready for its last descent. The dog tag caught the phone's dying light and threw it back cold. Marcus slid the final folder across the scarred metal desk. Page 406. Then 407. His breath fogged. The widows hummed louder now, the old forge song rising like distant turbine blades spooling up. He finished the last correction with a pen that had run dry twice already. The ink looked like dried blood under the weak glow. He capped it, stood, and tucked the dog tag into the breast pocket of his faded canvas jacket, right over the heart where it had ridden for 287 combat sorties and 9 quiet years of night audits no one had asked him to perform. The metal was warm now from his body heat. That small warmth felt like defiance. Outside, tires crunched on the frozen gravel of the employee lot. Headlights swept the frost-covered windows. Elena waited in the running truck, carbon copies clutched to her chest like a shield. When Marcus stepped into the pre-dawn air, the cold bit straight through his boots. "Truck's warm," she said, voice tight. "But half the directors just pulled in. Lang's Bentley is parked dead center like he already owns the building." Marcus said nothing. He climbed in, the dog tag clicking once against the seatbelt buckle. The cab smelled of coffee and printer toner. Elena drove the short loop around the perimeter fence while the clock on the dash counted down. 16 minutes. 14. The radio crackled with early morning dispatch chatter from the night shift that had never gone home. They were waiting too. They reached the side entrance of the old admin block. Marcus carried the corrected folder under one arm like a man carrying his own discharge papers. The hallways were darker than he remembered, the overhead fluorescents flickering in protest at the dying generator. At the far end of the corridor the boardroom doors stood open. Voices spilled out. Polished shoes. The faint click of a Patek Philippe against a mahogany table. Richard Lang's voice cut through first. "Gentlemen, the valuation is final. Apex Forge's liabilities wrapped in nostalgia. Scrap value at best. We liquidate, we move on. The incident report from 2014 stays sealed. No one gains from digging up rust." A few uncertain murmurs answered. Someone coughed. The sound of ice swirling in crystal glasses. Marcus paused just outside the threshold. The dog tag felt heavier. Elena touched his sleeve once, then stepped back into shadow. This part he would do alone. He walked in. Conversation died like a switched-off turbine. Lang stood at the head of the long table in a charcoal Brioni suit cut so sharp it looked weaponized. The Italian shoes gleamed under the emergency lights. His silver hair was perfect even at 5:20 in the morning. A thin smile appeared when he saw Marcus. "Security," Lang said, voice smooth as oiled bearings. "I believe I told this gentleman the premises were closed to former employees. Especially those who leave in the back of a squad car carrying nothing but a cardboard box." 2 rent-a-cops shifted. One reached for a radio. Marcus set the folder on the table. The sound was soft, but every head turned. He opened it without ceremony. Page 404. Page 405. The corrected indemnity language. The original crane certification that had been altered in 2014 by a junior engineer under direct instruction from the then CEO. The signatures. Both of them. Lang's smile faltered half a millimeter. "That's not admissible," he said. "Those documents were lost in the server migration." Marcus spoke for the first time since entering. "Lost is a strong word, counselor. I kept the carbon copies. Every single one. Same as I kept the maintenance logs the insurance company never received. Same as I kept the night flight manifests from the year I flew broken cranes out of war zones so the army could keep its airframes flying." The room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Someone whispered the word rook again. It traveled the length of the table like a spark along a fuel line. Lang recovered, straightening his cuff links. "Sentiment is not evidence, Mr. Hale. This meeting is about solvency, not fairy tales about some washed-up pilot playing janitor in my forge." Marcus let the silence stretch. Then he reached into his jacket and produced the dog tag. He laid it on top of the open folder. The metal clinked once against the paper. Every eye followed the small rectangle of steel. 8 minutes until the full quorum arrived with the press that Lang himself had invited to witness the triumphant sale. Lang's gaze locked on the tag. The name etched there was still legible after all these years. Lang's throat worked once. "I don't know what game you think you're playing." The side door opened again. 3 more directors entered, followed by a reporter from the Tribune whose press pass still swung from her lanyard. Behind them, the widow's hum had become a low chant carried by 20 night shift workers who had refused to clock out. They filled the hallway now. Boots. Coveralls. The smell of machine oil and strong coffee. Elena slipped in behind them and took a seat near the back. She held a single uncorrected carbon copy like it was a photograph of her late husband. Marcus kept his voice level. 19 hours until the public auction Lang scheduled so he could buy the forge for pennies on the dollar using a shell company registered in Delaware yesterday at 2:14 a.m. I have the time-stamped filing. Invoice number 4471. He slid a second sheet across the table. The room inhaled sharply. Lang's polished facade cracked another fraction. A single bead of sweat appeared at his left temple, glistening under the lights like a fault line in marble. One of the older directors, a woman who had been floor supervisor in 2014, picked up the dog tag. She turned it over in her hands. Her voice came out hoarse. "Rook, that was you." Marcus gave the smallest nod. The reporter's camera flashed. The sound was sharp, final. Lang cleared his throat. "This changes nothing. The board still votes on liquidation in 17 minutes. The crane collapse was an act of God. Insurance paid. End of story." But his voice had lost its glide. The Italian shoes no longer looked planted so firmly. He glanced at the growing crowd in the hallway, at the phones already recording, at the dog tag now being passed from hand to calloused hand. Marcus felt the first small reversal settle in his chest like fuel in an empty tank. Not victory yet. Just the promise of altitude. He checked his watch. 5:41 a.m. 16 minutes until the rest of the press arrives. 14 minutes until the union steward walks in with the sealed safety audit I filed the night after the crane dropped. "The one with your handwritten note on it, Mr. Lang. The one that reads, in your own handwriting, 'Bury this or we all burn.'" The temperature in the room bottomed out. Lang's Patek caught the light as his hand twitched toward the folder, then stopped. The tremor was small, but visible. Outside, more car doors. More footsteps. The widow's song swelled. Marcus left the dog tag on the table and stepped back. He let the silence do the next part of the work. Elena watched from the corner, eyes shining with something between pride and fear. The carbon copies in her lap were warm now from her hands. The mother in her recognized the shape of a man circling back to the controls of a burning aircraft, one corrected page at a time. Lang stared at the dog tag as if it had grown teeth. The corridor door swung open at 5:48 a.m. Union steward Ray Delgado filled the frame, 6'4" of calloused knuckles and faded local 412 windbreaker. In his left hand he carried a fresh manila envelope, thick as a brick. The seal was already broken. "Mr. Lang," Delgado rumbled, voice like gravel in a hopper. "This just got handed to me by the state inspector. It's the independent metallurgical report on Girder 14B. The one you swore under oath last year didn't exist." He dropped the envelope beside the dog tag. The two objects touched with a soft click. Lang's face drained to the color of old ash. "Ray, we need to talk outside." "No, sir. The widows are already seated in the press pit. Their lawyers are live streaming. And I'm done carrying water for a man who signed off on substandard Chinese steel while my members were welding it at 3 in the morning." Marcus didn't move. The canvas jacket still carried the faint tang of hydraulic fluid from the night he'd crawled through the wreckage 9 years earlier, photographing every compromised weld. He let the new envelope sit. Elena's fingers tightened around her carbon copies. The little girl's stuffed rabbit she'd brought from home that morning rested on the chair beside her, its faded brown fur absorbing the tension in the room the way it once absorbed her daughter's tears after the funeral. She had carried that rabbit to every hearing, every late-night strategy session. It had become her reminder that this wasn't only about contracts and steel. It was about the 8 fathers who never came home. Lang reached for the metallurgical report. His Patek scraped the table edge, a thin metallic whisper. He flipped the first page, eyes darting. The tremor in his hand had grown. "You leaked this," he hissed at Marcus. "I filed it the night the crane fell. Same night I pulled 3 of your welders out of the twisted rebar before the rescue crews even showed up. You called me scrap metal that same week, remember? Take your box of junk and get off my site." Delgado shifted his weight. The floorboards creaked under him. "There's more in here, Lang. Signatures. Timestamps. A $2.4 million wire to a shell company in Delaware the same month we lost those 8 men. The report names the exact heat numbers. Heat 7741. The batch you told the OSHA investigator was never used. The room temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Outside, tires crunched on the gravel lot. Car doors. Voices. Cameras being unpacked. Marcus spoke low, almost gentle. 6 minutes until the widows walk through that door. You can keep burying it. Or you can start telling them the truth while you still control the narrative. Lang's jaw worked. The Brioni suit, once knife-sharp, now looked like it was hanging on a man shrinking inside it. He stared at the dog tag again. The stamped letters on the metal caught the overhead fluorescence. He remembered the name now. The quiet foreman who never raised his voice, never missed a shift, who had walked the high steel like he was born to it. The man Lang had fired in front of the entire crew for insubordination after he refused to sign the false safety logs. The second crisis arrived at 5:53 a.m. The outer door banged open. 3 lawyers in matching charcoal suits swept in, led by Lang's corporate counsel, Victoria Hale. Her Louboutin heels clicked like countdown ticks. She carried a tablet already displaying a pre-written press statement. "Richard, we have a problem," she began, then froze when she saw the open envelopes, the union steward, the janitor-turned-avenger in the stained canvas jacket. Her eyes flicked to the dog tag. Recognition flared and died in the same second. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice suddenly careful. "I thought you were retired." Marcus offered a ghost of a smile. "I was. Then I read the obituary for the 8 men your client sacrificed for margin." Hale's tablet screen glowed at 14% battery. The statement on it blamed structural fatigue and unforeseeable weather. She closed the cover with a snap. Lang stood. The chair scraped back. For the first time in 9 years he looked directly at Marcus without contempt. 5 minutes, he said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "Give me 5 minutes alone with Ray. Then we'll talk to the widows." Delgado crossed his arms. "I'm not leaving this room, sir. Not while that dog tag is still on the table." The symbolic piece of metal sat between all of them now, warm from the overhead lights, cool from the night air that had followed Marcus in. It had traveled from the day Lang tossed it into a cardboard box along with Marcus's termination papers, to the glove compartment of a rusted pickup, to the safety deposit box where it waited for 9 years like a round chambered and waiting. Elena lifted the stuffed rabbit and placed it gently beside the tag. A small, deliberate act. The rabbit's button eye reflected the trembling signature Lang was about to give. The press pool was filing into the adjacent hall. Shoes on concrete. The low murmur of reporters comparing notes. Someone coughed. A camera tripod clacked into place. The widow's song had gone quiet, replaced by the electric tension of people who had waited too long for answers. Marcus felt the first small reversal from earlier settle deeper. Not victory. Not yet. Just the slow, procedural climb back to altitude. One corrected page, one forced signature, one witness at a time. He watched Lang's shoulders drop. The Brioni suit no longer screamed untouchable. It looked like expensive fabric wrapped around a man realizing the rust he had mocked was actually the rebar that kept the whole building from pancaking years earlier. The next envelope was already sliding across the table. This one carried the original crane maintenance logs Marcus had copied the night he was fired. Invoice number 4471. Handwritten margin note in Lang's own looping script, approve anyway. Budget closed. Marcus didn't speak. He simply tapped the dog tag once with his index finger. The metal rang softly, a single clear note that cut through the room like a call sign no one had heard in almost a decade. Lang's eyes closed. Outside, the clock on the county building across the street clicked to 5:56 a.m. 3 minutes until the widows entered. The core stakes had not changed. Control of the forge. The truth of the collapse. The public stage that now held 40 reporters, 8 grieving families, 1 union, and a man in a canvas jacket who had waited 9 years to land the aircraft he never got to fly. The dog tag waited with him. Still warm. Still counting down. The next envelope slid across the scarred oak table with the soft scrape of old paper. Lang's hand hovered above it, fingers trembling just enough to betray the Patek Philippe on his wrist. The watch that once ticked with absolute authority now looked like a shiny distraction. Marcus kept his voice low, almost conversational. Sign it, Mr. Lang. Same as the last one. Page 43 of the original safety audit you buried. Lang's pen scratched across the line. The ink bled slightly on the cheap copy paper. A small sound, but in the hush of the antechamber it landed like a hammer on glass. The stuffed rabbit sat between them now, its faded fur catching the fluorescent light. Marcus had placed it there deliberately after the first signature. A silent witness. The same rabbit that had ridden in his daughter's car seat the morning he was escorted out of the forge with nothing but a cardboard box and a severance check for $11,247. Outside the double doors the widows were gathering. Marcus could hear the rustle of coats, the occasional sniffle quickly swallowed. 8 women who had lost husbands when Crane 4 dropped 63 feet at 2:14 a.m. on March 17, 9 years earlier. Their song had stopped, but their silence pressed against the walls like incoming weather. Lang finished the signature. He slid the page back without looking up. Marcus tapped the dog tag again. The metal gave that same clear note. This one's for the widow's trust. 2.8 million. Signed, sealed, witnessed by your own general counsel at 5:58 a.m. Lang's shoulders folded another inch. The Brioni jacket no longer hung with that boardroom sharpness. It creased at the elbows like any other garment on a man who had just condemned himself on paper. 2 minutes. Marcus stood. The canvas of his jacket whispered against the chair. He gathered the growing stack of notarized documents, each one a precise reversal of a decision Lang had made while wearing $1,000 shoes. The maintenance logs. The altered stress reports. The kickback ledger from subcontractor 1842. All of it now carried fresh ink and today's date. He walked to the double doors and paused with one hand on the brass handle. The metal felt cool, grounding. Behind him Lang spoke for the first time in 23 minutes, voice hoarse. Marcus. I thought you were finished. Scrap. That's what I called you that day. I remember the exact words. I said them in front of the entire shift crew. Marcus didn't turn around. I know. The door opened. The press pool fell quiet the way a courtroom does when the verdict is about to be read. 40 reporters, cameras already rolling, lights hot on the long mahogany table set up on the small stage at the front of the hall. Union reps in their navy windbreakers sat shoulder to shoulder with the widows, 8 black dresses forming a single line of grief and iron resolve. The air smelled of burnt coffee from the press table and the faint metallic tang that always drifted in from the forge across the street, even after all these years. Marcus walked straight to the microphone. No notes. No prepared speech. Just the dog tag now hanging visibly from a simple ball chain around his neck, catching the light with every step. The stuffed rabbit rested inside the inner pocket of his jacket, pressed against his heart like it had been the night he carried his sleeping daughter out of the company daycare after they revoked his badge. He laid the stack of documents on the table with a soft thud. The sound carried through every speaker in the room. "These are the original records," he said, voice steady, the same tone he once used on open radio channels at 10,000 feet. "Signed this morning by the man who ordered the shortcuts. They prove the collapse of Crane 4 was not an accident. It was a budget decision. Approved by Richard Lang on invoice number 4471 with the handwritten note you're all about to see." A projector clicked on behind him. The margin note filled the screen in brutal black and white. Gasps rippled through the widows. One of them, Maria Delgado, clutched her late husband's hard hat so tightly the plastic creaked. Marcus continued, each sentence short, each fact a rivet driven home. The maintenance logs were falsified. The stress tolerances were ignored. The man who tried to stop it 9 years ago was fired at 7:03 a.m. the next morning and told his severance would be cut in half if he ever spoke about what he saw. That man was me. He let the silence stretch. Cameras flashed like distant artillery. Then he looked directly at the front row where Lang had been escorted to a lone chair by 2 union stewards. The CEO's face had gone the color of old concrete. "I was the original structural engineer on this forge. Call sign Rook during my 6 years with the Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. 287 combat sorties. I came home and designed the cranes that kept this place running for 12 years without a lost time incident. Until the day someone decided safety was too expensive." Lang stared at the floor. The Patek on his wrist caught the lights, but the reflection looked cheap now. Marcus lifted the final document. "This is the deed transferring controlling interest in the forge back to the employees' trust and the widow's fund. Effective immediately. The man who owns the majority shares after today's filings is no longer Richard Lang. It's the families he left behind." A single collective inhale swept the room. Then the widows began to clap. Slowly at first. Then stronger. The union men joined. The reporters forgot their professionalism and stood. The sound swelled until it pressed against the high windows and rattled the old metal light fixtures. Lang rose on unsteady legs. He walked to the microphone on legs that didn't seem to remember how to work. The room quieted by degrees until only the ticking of the wall clock remained. He looked at Marcus first. Private. The way a man looks at the mirror after the mask has finally cracked. "I was wrong," he said, voice cracking on the second word. "I called you scrap metal in front of 200 men because it was easier than admitting you were right. I destroyed the evidence. I destroyed you. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so damn sorry." Then he turned to the widows. Tears cut clean lines down his face. "To every one of you. I stole your husbands twice. Once on that crane, and again every time I lied to keep my position. The money in those accounts, the control of this forge, none of it was ever mine to take. I give it back. All of it. And if you'll allow it, I will spend the rest of my life making sure this place never forgets their names." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunder. Maria Delgado stood first. Then the others. They didn't cheer for Lang. They simply acknowledged the truth finally spoken in public. The dog tag around Marcus's neck caught the light again, warm against his collarbone. Later, in the emptying hall, Lang approached Marcus alone. The stuffed rabbit had found its way into Marcus's hand without him realizing. He turned it slowly, thumb tracing the worn ear the way his daughter once had. "I kept the rabbit," Marcus said quietly. "She outgrew it years ago, but I never could let it go. Every signature you gave this morning felt like I was finally handing it back to her. Whole." Lang stared at the toy. Something in his face shifted for the last time. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope one day your daughter hears what her father did here." Marcus gave the smallest nod. "She already knows. She's waiting outside." The two men stood in the hush of the aftermath. No more envelopes. No more signatures. Just the low hum of the forge waking up across the street, ready to run clean for the first time in 9 years. 9 months later the forge's new sign went up under a cold November sky. The widows cut the ribbon together. Marcus stood off to the side in the same canvas jacket, daughter now 16 beside him. The stuffed rabbit finally retired to a place of honor inside the safety office. Its single button I watched over the control room where new cranes lifted steel without a single skipped maintenance log. Lang had kept his word. He sold his remaining personal holdings, moved to a small house on the edge of town, and spent 3 mornings a week teaching safety protocols to the new apprentices. No title. No Brioni suit. Just a man who had learned, late, what steel really costs. Marcus never took an office. He still preferred the smell of cutting oil and the feel of a torque wrench in his hand. But on quiet afternoons he would walk the catwalks high above the floor, dog tag tapping gently against his chest, and remember the slow climb back to altitude. The rust, it turned out, had never been the problem. It had been the warning. And sometimes the only man who can save the structure is the one they tried to tear down first. In the end the debt was paid, not in vengeance, but in truth witnessed by every person who once looked away. The rabbit rested. The tag cooled. And the forge rang with the clean sound of steel meeting steel, honest and unforgiving and finally, after 9 long years, safe.